Okay, it's only appropriate then a presentation about sound. We have some sound challenges. Thanks, Doug, for your help. Welcome, everybody. A lot of people for our last seminar. Hooray! Good work, all of you. You deserve some applause for coming. Happy post-Thanksgiving. If you don't know where you are, this is the workshop in the history of material texts. Week 13 or something like that, and ultimate session of the semester. It's been a great semester, and I'm delighted to see new faces and old. Housekeeping stuff and announcements first. I'm John Pollack. I'm one of the people who help manage the seminar. Zach Lesser is over there summoning you all to sit at the table. Jerry Singerman is next to Zach, and Priya Nambrath is circulating an attendance sheet, is also our technical troubleshooter, listserv manager, scheduler, impresario of many tasks. So thank you, Priya, for all your help this semester. Always much appreciated. And if you have not been to this seminar before this is our last meeting of the term, but we will start up again fresh in January. The announcement of speakers essentially finalized, but you won't hear from us probably till January. So we'll give you an email break. And I do not remember when our first date is off the top of our heads. It's probably the week after the MLK holiday, as it always is. So for those of you new, if you'd like to receive that email, put your email on the sign-up sheet, and we will keep you informed. This is an open seminar. The topics change every week. If you're passionate about music tonight, you can be passionate about Renaissance poetry next time, or the history of publishing, or manuscript production, or digital technologies, or many, many other topics. I won't actually try to summarize all of the fun material textual adventures that we've had together, but it's been a great semester. We've heard about textiles as texts. We've heard about woodblocks, the fate of ancient codices, writing from behind prison walls, multiple forms of translation and mistranslation. We've heard about libraries and manuscripts and the challenges of preservation. And of course, on the power of print to make us choose things, which is appropriate in this, our season of shopping. Tonight, I'm really excited. Actually, before I start to introduce Emily, announcements. I have a couple. We'll hear from Emily tonight. It's actually a big week for talks. Tomorrow night in this exact same space, the pavilion here on the 6th floor, an old friend of this seminar will be presenting, Mary Fissel from Johns Hopkins. She'll be talking about a wonderful bestseller called Aristotle's Masterpiece. If you don't know what that is, it's not what you think it is. And there are copies in the Aristotle exhibit around the corner. Please come and hear Mary. That's 5:30 p.m. here tomorrow. On Thursday, also at 5:30, also in this space, the Penn Press will launch a new 21st century history of Greater Philadelphia in 3 volumes. So this is a book launch of this multi-volume set, and some of the volumes contributors and authors will be here that evening. So you're welcome to that as well. And finally, this is not a Penn-sponsored event, but you bookish people might want to know that there is a Philadelphia Rare Book Fair. This is, I think, the 3rd or 4th year of the fair, on Thursday night, Friday, and Saturday at Trinity Church on 22nd and Spruce. I'm not sure if it's free or a small charge. Small charge. If you've never been to a rare book fair, this is a great one to see. It's not enormous, but there are some good dealers, and you can spend your Christmas bonus or whatever. Buy something and donate it to the library. We're always happy to talk to you. Okay, that's for the week, but now to the main event. And our concluding talk this semester is Professor Emily Green of George Mason University. who's going to take us into the musical cultures of 18th and early 19th century Europe and America. Some of you old-timers know that this seminar has always tried to include music as one of its primary centers of attention. Early work of Jessie Ann Owens was presented here. More recently, we've heard from Kate Van Orden, Jeff Kahlberg, Mary Caldwell, and Glenda Goodman, who are here. It's certainly important to this seminar that we keep up and extend the conversation between musicologists, music historians, and the way they think about the circulation of music and how it intersects with the many other texts in our domain. So that's what Emily, I'm sure, will help us do this evening. More formally, Emily is Associate Professor of Music History in the Dewberry School of Music at George Mason University, and she focuses on the musical worlds of the 18th and mid-19th century. In 2017, she co-edited a volume with Catherine May's volume of essays, which is entitled Consuming Music, Individuals, Institutions, Communities. And that collection, which is fascinating, focuses explicitly on topics of real interest to this seminar, including sales, marketing, advertising, celebrity culture, and the public performances of music across many genres. Her own contribution to that volume, in it, Emily sort of put a new lens, sorry, that's a pun for tonight, on 18th century music publishers, arguing that they could serve as patrons, but also as consumers, and were kind of essential mediators of musical sales and musical tastes. A little side note, in that essay, she makes remarkable use of printed catalogs of music. That's the kind of thing that only excites rare book librarians, but we...
Not only.
Okay, good to hear. In 2019, she published a monograph which has another gerund in its title, Dedicating Music, 1785 to 1850. And this is a really interesting study of the ways in which patronage and what she calls the dedication market for printed music, which of course has roots in the Renaissance, but changed dramatically in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Music dedications, Emily tells us, they don't hold back, actually. They reveal a lot about social networks and hierarchies, class relations, friendship bonds. Gifting and market economies overlap. Haydn, I learned, had so many works dedicated to him that Emily had to produce an enormous chart to list them all. And somehow out of this world, she demonstrates that a bit uneasily, a new cult of the composer emerges that may be a little more familiar to us today. I was also struck by the importance of naming the dedicatee on the engraved title pages for these musical imprints. That's present in printed books, of course, other printed books too, but perhaps not to such a great extent. I also want to just mention a scholarly website that Emily has created and keeps up with others, including Maria Ryan, who's Penn PhD in music and friend of this seminar. Those of you who know Maria. The website is called Early Black Music in Performance, a guide for musicians who learn, teach, interpret, and program. And it's a really ambitious attempt to bridge scholarship, music practice, and pedagogy. So it combines analyses of source problems with listening examples and suggestions for conceiving modern performance based in socially just and honest research. It's a really amazing website that I will return to often and study. Since she likes gerunds, we could retitle tonight's talk, Making Mistakes. And I have to say, I think I'm particularly well qualified to introduce this because I am, as some of you know, a very amateur early music performer. I'm actually playing a concert this week with the Penn Baroque Ensemble. So I'm really familiar with mistakes because I make a lot of them. And I'd like to blame it on bad lighting or an earthquake or whatever. I suspect that is probably never the case. It's just me, but maybe not. So we're going to travel with Emily into a world in which our errors may teach us more than our intentions. Welcome and thanks.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here and share my work with such a broad and curious audience. I had a plan to start with this playful little survey, which is what this QR code is for. We had some technical difficulties, and I'll just summarize the survey for you, and you can contemplate what your answer would have been. There are three answers already, Charlie, from the Zoom crowd. Have you ever made a mistake in live performance of any kind?
My
And it doesn't have to be musical performance, giving a talk. I once loaded my very first talk at a national conference. I had my first and last slide the same, and I loaded the last slide and then was like, it's not going anywhere. But then the other question would be like, why do you think you made that mistake? And there can be many reasons. And I think once you start probing those reasons, it gets interesting. And so that probing was the beginning of this work that I'm going to show to you today. Okay, so we're doing that. Right, you said it would get confusing.
You can just.
No, it must have gone to sleep or something. Oh, maybe it will. Oh.
Okay,
No,
you're running it. You're running it.
Okay. Yay. Okay. So if we can picture a scene such as this, and the clouds get dark, maybe the 18th century windows start to shutter, and you have a scene such as Goethe describes in Werther. The dance was not yet finished when the lightning we had been seeing on the horizon for some time, and which I had constantly identified as lightning, which cools the atmosphere without pretending rain. One has to show their expertise. Began to grow much stronger, and thunder drowned out the music. 3 ladies broke ranks, followed by their partners. The chaos became general, and the music stopped. So that's a moment of error in music and dance in Europe or the North Atlantic in the 1770s. And that's my subject in the historical moment I'm investigating. Answering questions like, what would have made someone misread, turn too many pages, pause for too long, flub a scale, do all the things that we wish we didn't do? How are those things documented, and what can we know? What I know of this room is that we're interested and share a desire to understand how people either compiled or used texts. So this talk is about use. What I want to explore today is the reason for my contention that mistakes are caused by something. I know you think it's just you, John, but either in the moment of performance or in preparation, and that something is often a distraction, either material or bodily. So these are the subjects I'm prepared to discuss, of which I just have time to pick a few, talk about the ones in dark green, but I can talk about the ones in blue too afterwards, or maybe any other things you think should be up there. It's an endless list, really. One thing to know or consider in all these contexts in the 1770s, a lot of music was played from printed sources, maybe more than you might realize. And when it was played at sight more than it is today. Women playing music in the home, Mozart playing for court officials, enslaved musicians and free musicians of color playing at dances and balls. And this means you had to see. Other music was not, and probably not ever, performed with a written text, like lullabies. Most music that the average person would hear and would have most music that the average person would hear would have been played by women. And I'd like to address distraction in both the written and oral traditions of music making as much as I can, and always keep my eye on gender as a factor. So that's one thing. Second, as many of you might suspect, little regarding the reasons for error is recorded. Nobody runs to their diary to proudly write down that they messed something up. We know people made mistakes, and I use error and mistake pretty interchangeably, but we really don't know why. Like, what was wrong with Mozart's frenemy, Abbe Fogler, that Mozart said his sight reading was tantamount to taking a shit? If you don't know Mozart, you know he likes that word. Did he have a bad day? Was he distracted by his disgust for Mozart? I've tried to figure out a lot of things, like was he sick? But I don't know. I just don't know. We can guess. So for those reasons, a great deal of what I'm about to say is speculative, but a lot of what we say about history is speculative. But this is pretty speculative. I think it's speculation worth undertaking because it gets us into the lives of historical actors and texts in a way that's not otherwise available. All right, so let's start with glasses. Those are Beethoven's glasses from 1806. And Mozart did record, he did like to record other people's mistakes. The first organist played even more wretchedly, and I think that if the two organists were thrown together, something even worse would be the result. To watch these gentlemen is enough to die of laughing. The second, when seated at the organ, is like a child at a stool, for his face tells you what he can do. The first, at any rate, wears spectacles. So certainly few reports of concert appearances today would remark on a player's eyewear, unless they were like very dramatic. The presence of corrective lenses was clearly remarkable, and even remarkable, they made no difference. And this, I believe, and hopefully given what I'll tell you today about glasses, maybe you'll believe it too. So assistive eyeglass technology, and probably many of you know some of this stuff about glasses and candles, but I'm hoping that I can kind of put it together in a way that might be new for you, or maybe all of it is new for you. I don't really know. So assistive eyeglass technology had existed since approximately the 14th century in Europe and was in a state of transition around the 1770s. Several types of spectacles were in circulation at this time, like these two types. There's the English, like using French words and then mispronouncing them wrong. So I'm assuming these are called the pince-nez, or what D'Alembert called besicles, or spectacles without arms that sit, on your nose. And then glasses more similar to those worn today with arms pressed against the side, sometimes called Martin's margins. I think here we just have, yeah. In the 1770s, the popularity of glasses was noted by observers. Young German Carl Philipp Moritz noted their ubiquity with surprise when he visited London. One thing in particular struck and surprised me not a little. This was the number of people we met riding and walking with spectacles on, among whom many appeared stout, healthy, and young, only a compliment a German would give. And this is just a bit of like an ad. You can see there's quite a range in styles and prices. So there are two central ways in which poor eyesight and spectacle use could have caused musical error, I think. Either they were not available to everyone, or they were not accurate. So around the 1770s, glasses were specialty items, meaning that not everyone who needed them would have had them. Certainly enslaved people would have rarely had them, and I've also found no record of women of any age wearing glasses around the 1770s. No imagery. Certainly painters, even if there was a woman who would have worn glasses, a painter might have been asked, like, don't paint me with these on. That's possible. Jane Austen, we know, had glasses. They were found in a desk of hers. You can read about this. But that was in adulthood in the early 19th century. Even then, she may have been the exception. I have one print of a woman wearing glasses or having, let's say, glass, a corrective lens, which she uses as a like foil to flirt with that guy. So, a tool, but not that kind of tool. So part of the problem, like I said, is that women had few professional positions that would have given them the opportunity to be depicted with glasses. Obviously, a portrait of someone has a professional use, especially for men. And they may have also not had the opportunity to wear or own them at all. At the same time, it's likely that women needed glasses as much as anyone else. They read, they played music, they used their eyes. Abigail Williams discusses this in her book on reading. If such women wore no glasses, particularly when playing music, I mean, I can see around the room, you understand what happens when you don't have these things. And the same goes for enslaved musicians reading music for dances and balls. They also were an imperfect tool at this point. So even when people wore and owned glasses, they would have been challenges in using them. This is one of the few prints I found of a musician using them from this period. So first of all, pince-nez, if there's an English person who tells me how you say that word, not in French. Maybe we should say pince-nez. They could be uncomfortable. If you wear them above the bridge of your nose, if you just squeeze there for a minute, you realize it actually starts to hurt. And that gets old real fast. So that's the problem with up here. You could wear them up there, or you could wear them down here below the bump in your nose, and then you realize what happened, the problem with that. So it could cause obstruction of the nasal passages. The other thing is, and I don't know if any musicians or anybody who has played music with glasses has had this problem, but usually when you get correction for reading, you get correction for reading. And reading is a particular distance. And music is a different particular distance. So it wouldn't be accurate. And musical notes are tiny. So the difference between one and another is significant. You know, it's this small. And if you play an E versus a D, you're playing a wrong note. This oboist has the sort of Martin's margins variety. The ear thing doesn't come until the 19th century. Everything just goes like sort of straight on your head in this period, which also means it's probably tight. So he puts his glasses against his eyes in order to get the best angle. But in doing so, they're probably touching his eyeglasses, his eyelashes, which was apparently also a problem. And there may have been a weird angle to the glass if he's pushing them up that high and they're supposed to be a little lower. And then when you have glass that's pretty simply crafted at the wrong angle, you get a refraction problem. And D'Alembert warns about this in his article on Lunette, actually. He says, spectacles have to be placed on the nose in a particular way. Their lenses should be made only of the most flat glass. And he implies that image warping or too bright of a light can otherwise occur. Did I give you the, yeah, so there's that guy. This is one of these classic caricatures with lots of things going on. So the other thing that's interesting is astigmatism correction did not exist in this period. So this is a problem of vision entirely separate from distance, and it was uncorrected until after this guy, Thomas Young, kind of discovered it and wrote an essay and gave lectures about it. So even if made of the most reliable material, positioned at the right angle, not hurting your nose, not falling down your nose, and your music's right there, you might still not really be able to kind of see what you're supposed to play. So I bring all this up because it is dang hard to play music if you can't see it and you've never seen it before, which is a lot of how music playing happened. So that's glasses. Then there's also candles, which were a big problem, as certainly many of us already know who study this period or other periods. What happens next in this scene? Somebody's head catches on fire. Yeah. Again, lots of other things going on here too. There's a dog. Okay. So candles were distracting. People made music at night. Here's some evidence for both of those things. The dimness in Jane Austen, the dimness of the light of her candle emitted made her turn to it with alarm, but there was no danger of its sudden extinction. It had some hours to burn. And then there's Horace Walpole in 1763. The little concert lasted till past 10. There were minuets, as we had 7 couples left. It continued with a country dance. 12:15, they sat down to supper, and I came home by charming moonlight. And there are tons of examples of people staying out past midnight. Apparently, often some country dances didn't start until midnight. And then free black violinist John Morant wrote in Charleston of his experiences in Charleston. Every evening I was sent to play music somewhere or other, and I continued out very late, sometimes all night, so as to render me incapable of attending my master's business the next day. So whether at court or at home or on a paid gig, musicians relied on candles throughout the Northern Hemisphere, really. And while there were a variety of types of candles of varying quality, the proper function of all of them was subject to unreliability of materials and human error, both of which could potentially cause distraction or more. So first, I don't know why I put a slide first of something that did not exist in the 1770s, just to show you how limited the options were. This is the argon lamp that George Washington said he wrote by, but this was not invented until the 1780s. So again, the 1770s are kind of special time for limited technology. This is a gas lamp. There's a little like valve. And as I was looking for images of it, I noticed a lot of them that had been turned into electric lamps. So you might have seen this design just like as a design. So there were no oil lamps in the home. There were oil lamps that lit streets, like in Boston and in London, and had for a while, but they were not used yet in domestic situations. So no oil, no gas, no argon lamps inside the house. Only candles. So we have tallow, beeswax, spermaceti, thanks to the North American whale trade starting in the 1750s. The problem with tallow, of course, is that you can make it from any animal wax, any animal fat. So it really depends on your process. Also, counter to that, it means it's extremely available. So anybody poor, enslaved, you can make a candle if you have access to animal fat. But it might pop, it might sputter, it might go out, it might make a mess, it might startle you if any like impurities in the fat are stuck in the candle. Beeswax and spermaceti are more reliable. Here's a fun fact. The steadiness of light of a candle that it could produce depended not only on wax quality, but on wick quality. If you look closely at the candles you have at home, they have braided wicks. And so the wick like kind of comes up and curves like a finger inside the flame, and that helps the wick just burn itself out. They were called self-trimming wicks when they were invented in the 19th century. So what happens if you don't have that kind of wick? You can have twisted wicks or just straight wicks, and these things, again, can make a mess. They just like droop and droop into themselves. We're coming up on Hanukkah. I don't know if anybody has had like errant Hanukkah candles, menorah candles that just like bleh, like all over the place. Those are not high quality wicks. So that's the reason you need candle snuffers. And you say candle snuffer, you think like the thing that does that, but this is the candle snuffer of this period. It's like a scissors, and you catch the snuff. You're not putting the candle out, you're catching the wick that is about to make a mess. And so you can see the guy doing that up there. So there's a lot of technology and like human labor that can go into maintaining let's say consistent and reliable and not distracting light from candles. And again, and then if you think about the proximity that a candle needs to be to someone to see their music, it might even get scarier, right? So from wax quality to slight breezes, drafts, type of wick, a musician's focus could be interrupted by the failure or fear of failure of this technology in a home where a single candle will be doing a lot of work on its own and would need to be near the page in order to do its work. Oh, yeah. And it should not go unmentioned that candles were flames causing the destruction of opera houses and many other such structures throughout, just a long time. Several caricatures show errors in proximity to candles with combustible consequences, from the inflammation of the feather that we saw earlier to burning through a hat, which is, it's a caricature, but still it seems realistic. A musician would be forgiven for being distractibly vigilant around this dangerous visual aid in their midst. This is the last little type of making light that I just learned about, the rush candle. Rush is a plant. You can take a stem of it and dip it or soak it in wax and then put it on one of these things. And then you have a candle and this other thing. But people did complain that they made a lot of mess and they sputtered. There's a reason maybe some of us have not heard of them. They didn't survive and they weren't great. Okay. Now I want to switch gears pretty drastically to a kind of distraction that is equally difficult to endure as problems with candles and glasses, but difficult to discuss. And I wanted to get to a wide range of stuff, so I apologize for really turning a semi-truck here, but I think it's worth it. I want you to think about the saddest, most awful grief that could occur to a person while trying to focus on a task. And maybe some of you have had, I asked you what might have distracted you and had you made a mistake, and we were in like a jokey moment there, but lots of things can pull a mind away from what it's supposed to be doing. So this is some triggering stuff, but I think it's worth it to talk about. I just wanted to warn you. So mortalities in this period are serious business, as I'm sure is not a surprise for many of us. Someone distracted at the keyboard might get stuck if she experienced many of these kinds of things. So, and these are probably types of facts that many of us in this room have encountered. Again, like some of the other stuff I've talked about, but I think it's important to bring them up, to look at them. So Mozart and his sister Nonneral were 2 of 5 children. The other 3 didn't make it. Mozart and his wife had 6 babies, 6 pregnancies. 2 lived to adulthood. 1 died on the day she was born. 1 died, their first died while they were away. They had left the baby with someone. Here we're talking about 9 years of expectancy and grief. This is a headstone from the first cemetery for free Black Americans that I know of in Charleston. This is a child who died at 5. This is Mary Vile Holyoke's children. She had 12. The ones in yellow are the ones who died. This is a 23-year span of having children. This is during smallpox. Her husband was a doctor, which you would think maybe could have made things either better or worse. I don't know. But you notice that she had 3 daughters who she nicknamed Polly. All of whom died. Oh, sorry, I hadn't put the yellow up. And when I put the yellow up, the white started to look yellow, which I felt was like kind of significant. Don't put this in my notes. This is a letter from a composer, Krauss, to his friend Gleim, saying that his godchild died at 16 weeks, his son died. You see in what affliction we have lived for a couple of months, and my wife had thereby become quite miserable and is having difficulty recovering from it. So a person trying to play a piece during such a time, if she contemplated her or someone else's loss, if her candle flickered, and then a composer could imitate, if her candle flickered, what does she do when she plays? You know, with all of this stuff going on that could be going on in her life. Then you have people like Haydn, who did write pieces in which they seem to be imitating this kind of distraction. Oh, there's more stuff. There's always more stuff. I skipped some of my mortalities. There's obviously also maternal mortality, which was written about a lot. These are many, many treatises that were published in the 1770s about maternal mortality. These are some facts. We don't know the numbers about enslaved women maternal mortality. We do know the numbers about just kind of London hospitals statistics, which is 100 times what it is today. So if we think about women of color dying in childbirth at a rate of 2 times what it is today, then we can guess 2 to 4 times. So we're talking about 200 to 400 times the numbers of today. Okay. So now I'm gonna hide. Just talk you through what could have happened if this was someone. This is imitating someone making an error. Moving along, playing my awesome piece. Cool piece. Yeah, I like this part. Oh man, you remember that thing? Am I still playing the same chord? I'm still playing the same chord. I don't know what comes next. Just keep playing the same chord. Oh. If you want to hear it again without me talking over it, we can do that. But I hope I've made some sort of case that musicians got distracted for many reasons. That music wasn't probably perfectly performed, however we might define that, just as lives weren't perfectly lived. So I look forward to your thoughts, comments, and questions. Thank you. That was the sound we worked so hard for, so thank you.
Worth it. Absolutely worth it. The floor is open. Liliana, first question. Maybe she knows someone in Germany who.
Thank you.
with glasses.
I work on German material. Indeed. Thank you so much. I work on German material and I work on, for example, German philosophers of the late 17th, 18th century, who made their daily money by grinding glasses for eyeglasses.
Right.
And that is not just Spinoza, it's also Lazarus ben David and so on. And there were plenty of eyeglasses to be had in Berlin in the 18th century. And if somebody like Carl Philipp Moritz is commenting on the eyeglasses of London, it may have a very simple reason. He made his money by operating cataracts. So
Okay.
this is a very different view on eyeglasses than being surprised at the number. He made his money. There are plenty of paintings of women wearing glasses, by the way. There is a very famous one of Anna Dorothea Terbusch, the painter who painted herself in a self-portrait with glasses to make a point of how minutely she was painting the portraits. So indeed, it is not an issue that isn't done. It is just that for some they were costly.
Yeah.
You had to buy them, but they were around and they were acceptable and they were even for many good correctives. So I'm not quite sure that I'm totally with you on the glasses.
Yeah, great. Thank you. No, I appreciate it. I didn't know about that painting. So I will look it up. I spent a lot of time around caricatures, which I think are meant to give a kind of, let's say, slice of activity. We can learn a lot about interior domestic life.
But the point is, if you don't look at caricatures, it is much more poignant when people take them seriously.
Sure. Yeah. 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 No, I think that.
But they're really, it's really around.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Clearly from that advertisement, there's a huge variety and
in the
range of prices.
Constantly women wearing glasses.
Although I do think that as a glasses wearing musician, the problem of glasses and the problem of music making is a serious one, because correcting for that distance is a problem still today. I mean, you know, it's and I don't know if anybody explicitly comments on what you can see and what you can't with your glasses.
Right. Right. So first of all, thank you. And I will amend some of my comments for sure. It's the domestic kind of amateur woman that I'm most interested in. And it may be that paintings depict not that type of person. What do you think about that?
I don't think that is the case.
Okay.
I think it may be that, how should we say, in some domestic settings, women were also playing music who are of marriageable
Yes.
age.
Yes.
And who really want to do an impression, not as professional musicians necessarily, but
Yeah.
nice musicians.
Yes.
So maybe that's why they may not have always worn it. I'm now speculating, but they were certainly around and they were certainly wearing them.
Yeah.
And that's in my mind not the problem, but
Yeah, sorry, Jerry, go ahead and then we'll go to the side of it.
Yeah, thank you for this. I've been looking at the images that you've shown, the caricatures that you've shown. First of all, they run counter to your statement that music making was done by women. And I'm also I think the issue of sight, which is candles and eyeglasses, is complicated by the images that you've shown because it's only the keyboardist, and it's consistently only the keyboardist who has sheet music, and the instrumentalists are standing there without sheet music. And so presumably, and they are men, but they're playing without reliance on sight and without reliance on sheet music. There's one of your caricatures, also the vocalist, who is also a woman,
Yeah.
is holding the music, but again, the male musicians are not. And so I'm wondering whether there's something about playing the keyboard that demands music more, because it's also a male in one of your images. The male musician has sheet music. But if there's also in these caricatures a division between
So
professional musicians and amateur musicians, right? So the amateur may be dependent upon the sheet music and the professional is not, and therefore the amateur more reliant on
Well-
eyeglasses or candlelight.
yeah, yeah, thanks. What I would say is that actually keyboards just tend to be like music stands for groups a lot of the time. So people, that's a place where a few different players could see music.
Okay, I mean, it doesn't look as if it would be visible to them from the images that you showed.
Yeah,
But you know, I
yeah, there
have to rely on your.
are others from there are others that show people looking the oboist one, for instance. I mean, that's a ridiculous one where someone's like
Yeah, so you make.
physically holding music, but you know, caricatures are caricatures. But music stands were not as common, and so the keyboard was often just where people would look for
Okay,
music.
yeah.
So that's another issue I could have talked about is like, can you actually see the music from even further away?
Glasses of Moses Mendelssohn when he played the piano
Yeah,
are actually existent
that's wonderful.
and
Yeah.
are in the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And I can show you a picture.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, no, for to be clear, I'm not saying nobody had glasses. I'm just saying they had some issues.
Let's jump, Glenda.
Yeah, well, as someone who also is interested in amateur music making and women, I have thoughts about how we read caricatures anyway.
Yeah.
But actually, which I thought you were presenting as sort of, am I correct that you're not presenting them as historical representation?
Yeah.
So then how do you, when you're doing your research, because I know that this is a work in progress, how do you decide how you're going to treat something? Because I also know you read things with you're showing us things to read them with a grain of salt, but then also like really challenging us to not shy away from the most challenging subjects, which you are not making light of. So how do you see a material text perspective, or how do you engage with this in the context of this seminar? So taking the sources seriously, but also not taking some too seriously. And then you played us a little bit of Haydn, but like, how do you read, instrumental musical texts into this? Because that's something where you really have to supply all of the words that would allow us to figure out how to take it seriously or not. So that's two different questions. Presented as if it's one.
To me, I think the question of, well, thank you. The question of what would have kind of spurred someone to misread can only be taken in a kind of culturally holistic sort of way. I can't say that this caused that, or I can't point to a cause and effect. And I think that any of one particular thing, except, if you see Mozart talking, like a particular report. And even then it's not so clear. So this is why I have, all those boxes of blue and green things, to say that, domestic life in particular, is messy. And here is all of the messiness. So I think the characters are meant to show us the messiness, that there, as you say, there's a purpose to them. I think when I read them, they kind of show you what could be in a room, So there are some that have barometers in living rooms, which is another subject. And that's mostly what I read them for. There are more things you can do with them. So my reason for, I guess, to answer your question, the way to cover the question of error for me is through this very, very broad lens of what are all it's kind of like sound studies, like what are all the sounds, and then I suppose sort of emotional events that happen within a domestic space, that could incur on somebody's performance. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, the other question was about incorporating like score-based evidence into something that's much more culturally and situated.
That is the only, well, there is a lot of, number one, repetition in music of the 1770s. And number two, there are a lot of pauses. So when I started to think about that, and then there are composers who play with both of those things. And there is writing a great deal on humor, in especially Haydn. And when I listened through this lens, it sounded more like that humor was like modeling error. Like there was a particular kind of, it's not just humor, it's this kind of humor. It's someone messing up. So that's the score part.
Yeah, I love that example. Mary had a question back.
Yes, I do. So it's sort of a two-part one. The first comes out of my own experience working with manuscripts, so an earlier period, but dealing with scribal errors. So I wondered what you found from the 1770s or around that period where performers are making mistakes because there's something wrong in the actual source they're reading.
Mm-hmm.
See that? Because certainly it happens a lot in manuscripts, right? There are some errors that are really common when you're copying by hand. And there are two errors that are common when you're printing sources. That was one part of it. And that maybe connects a little bit to Glenda's question about the actual manuscript sources and how they factor into this. And then the second one was actually inspired by the image with the woman with the monocle kind of flirting to the guy to her right or whatever. Because one thing I don't see in your collection of boxes is romance, flirtation, the way that can kind of be a distraction, but at the same time, how music is a form of flirtation. So I wondered if you could use a little bit about that element too in this.
Yeah. That is, that should be a box. It's in there a little bit. There's a nice book on music in the Georgian novel that has a little bit on, I can't remember who wrote it. Yes. So music is 100% flirtation in some contexts. And I mean, the only answer to that question is yes. I don't remember the first part for your first question.
Oh, the first was about errors in the actual source.
Oh, yes. And so another thing to add then would be that so much music, especially ensemble music, circulated in manuscript at this time and was copied, as you alluded to, was copied like the night before by someone working furiously because Mozart just finished the opera or something like that. That hasn't been as much of a focus for me because I've been interested in the more like domestic amateur situation, but there are references to that not directly to like reading messed up parts, but references to ensemble musicians who mess up in some of the treatises that we would look at, like Quantz, especially Turk, but mostly Quantz talks the most about it. Leopold Mozart. These people talk about like how to be a good ensemble musician. But I guess the counterexample to that would be if you have a full ensemble and someone messes up, are you gonna hear it? But you know, I'm not so focused on what you can and can't hear. So that's absolutely an issue, I guess is the short answer. Thank you. Back.
Oh, thank you for that. It's very like generative talk for me. I'm a theater scholar, and so like a couple thoughts. But the first is about that Haydn, which I found really interesting. Like, and I don't know, I know like very little about this or classical music. Like, is that a funny joke that like is understandable to people at the time? And then like, how common was it to do that? And then the notation that's perdendosi, which is like getting lost.
Mhm.
Is that a normal musical notation, or is like that a joke that he's like, let's say you were sight reading that, like, do you know what to do when you
Yeah.
see it? It's not like fortissimo or something, right? So do you know what to do there? So that's just an informational question, but I love that example. And then, so the place, it's interesting that you're saying like there aren't many like there aren't many pieces of evidence of musical error in performance, but like there are a lot of those, I would say, I mean, relatively, it sounds like to music in acting, right?
Mhm.
So there's
Right.
a lot of records of
Yes.
actors messing up,
Yeah.
and then there's jokes about actors and why they might mess up. I mean, Shakespeare has the rude mechanicals who don't understand how to read a script part, and then there's people who get scared on stage. You know, we have a lot, and then there's the whole realm of like theater lore, actors lore about why you might like dry up or forget your lines, or right, and like what you do to avoid that. It's like such a big part of. So I wonder about like, is that true? Do you think, is there like, I always, when I was learning music, assumed that people who really knew how to play music like didn't really worry about messing up when they played, like it was just me. But like actors always worry they're gonna forget their line, like they worry that.
Yeah.
Even like the most professional actors worry about that, and it's like it's like athletes who suddenly can't do the thing that they're able to do. That's the other area that you have a lot of some people fail, like error in athletics, where like you suddenly can't throw the ball that you have done your whole life, right? So I wonder if there's something to be gained from those kind of comparisons, and like why is it then, if it's true that there's so many fewer records in terms of musical performance, like what that says about the musical performance as a craft that might be different from acting or other areas where you do have more of the practitioners themselves like talking about and worrying about it and writing about it. It's not like kind of wouldn't put it in your diary or something. General.
Yeah. So the Haydn question, Perdendosi is not that common. It's more common in the 19th century. That I didn't mention that symphony was written based on incidental music Haydn had written for a play called Il Distratto. And then so he just took some of that music and made it into a symphony. The reason I call so you can't have an orchestra, you can't write a symphony. Playing on the keyboard is different from an ensemble. You know, a single person can mess up and fix it. An orchestra can't mess up and fix it. So this is Haydn writing an imitation of someone messing up and fixing it. The other, I think in general, the word is meant to signal slowing down and getting softer. Just about evidence in theater, I think so. People who wrote treatises on what is best to do, you know, if you're going to be a good musician, are really not concerned about any of the things you mentioned that actors are concerned with because no one plays from memory. So musicians don't have the same concerns. They're interested in, I mean, singers might, but even some of those treatises on singing don't have the kind of like anxiety that you're talking about. It's much more about like, oh my gosh, is my voice going to work? So it's really about communicating what the piece is, doing the right kinds of ornaments, total obsession about ornaments in the 18th century, rather than any kind of forgetting because you have the music in front of you. Now, any of us who's played with music in front of us knows you can still mess up with the music in front of you, but this is not anything anyone was worried about or spoke about worrying about, as far as I know.
Nice. Maybe one more point. Think about Glenda's point about like how might you read this back into or alongside this the musical notation, the scores. So the candles, so it seems to be true that when Shakespeare's company moved to their indoor theater, about halfway through Shakespeare's career, 2/3 of the way through his career, they had a ton of candles in the indoor theater, which were not there in the outdoor theater, and that coincides with when it seems like Shakespeare starts writing his plays in acts because they needed an interact to trim the wicks of the candles. So you needed time to do that, and you get a very clear act.
Oh,
Right.
I didn't know that.
So I wonder if there's, if any like transformations in some of the technologies that you're thinking about might. But it's interesting to me. So there's a lot of repetition. Like, there's a certain repetition. Is that useful? See the score very well, or you know what I mean? Could you trace any kind of transformations in musical trends to some of the
Yeah. I know the repeated A section as a crack at it.
You have movement. You have a pause between movements.
You have movements and you have large scale repeats, which people stopped doing so much in the 19th century. That's a great suggestion to think about. Thank you.
They're doing something that, no one is,
Jessica.
I'm gonna sneak in one question and then Jessica, because just as a quick follow-up, don't you think that there's a kind of, it's always like Haydn versus Mozart, I guess, but that there's a Haydn with that example is sort of tolerant of error, it's part of the fun, and Mozart is so goddamn intolerant of error, everything else. I mean, is that some kind of cultural bifurcation?
No.
There?
No, I should have played for you as Mozart's ridiculous piece, musical joke, Sextet, which is full of, it's just a whole big joke on making the last chord is wrong. You can go home and listen to it. It's pretty hilarious. But Haydn likes to play more with this kind of what we might call like a structural mistake. Like I got lost. Than Mozart does. Yeah.
But it might be a culture of joking, then put it a different way about this, yeah.
But does joking in a music like that kind of joke? Like, I didn't really hear it.
Yeah, Zach wants to know.
It really depends on, but it's actually depending on expertise from the audience, right?
Sure.
Being able to notice.
Yes.
Many people maybe didn't. I mean, I think I'd hear the
Yeah.
head's on a bad chord, but I don't know that. You know what I mean? So it's like an interplay. There's like error, there's fake error, but there's also like expecting a kind of connoisseurship, like the opposite of error.
Sure. Yeah. And that. I'm making more of the argument that this is another way of kind of seeing the echoes of error in the culture. But yeah, there are folks who work on Haydn who you could have a conversation with about connoisseurship.
Jessica. Hi there, Jessica.
Hi there. Thanks so much for that wonderful talk. I hope I'm not jumping on the spectacles dead horse bandwagon, but I wanted to tell you about a painting that's at the Center for British Art at Yale, and then to ask you a question related to it. And so this painting is from the 1740s, and it's called The Sense of Hearing, and it depicts four amateur women musicians, three of whom are young and one is who is old. There's a pianist and a flautist and a violinist and a cellist. And the flautist and the violinist are kind of straining to look around the pianist to read the music. But the cellist, who is an older woman, is wearing glasses. And I really think you should look at this painting. But the question I wanted to kind of tag on to that is like, are you thinking about intersections between, I guess, gender and age? Right. There's a point for which like I had very good vision and then I hit my 40s and I did not anymore. And I wonder if that's also something that you should be thinking about when you're looking at some of these images.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, one thing, yes, yeah. I've seen that cellist. I've seen that cellist excerpted. Maybe he's on a book cover. One thing that has occurred to me is at all the intersection of many of the things I've talked about is age for sure. We have young women who are playing, for suitors, as the question was in the back, and then you have older women who are not, and who may be experiencing other sorts of, problems, loss, distraction, physical issues. So there are different intersections of distractions at different ages. Absolutely.
All right, yes, please, whoever had their hand up there, go ahead, sorry, thanks.
Hi, this is a step away from glasses and candles and more about access to musical education. You cited Austen, and in her and the novels of the Bronte sisters, there's some discussion between the female characters about the quality of piano playing, and it's treated as this sort of social capital. And it seems, in the case of a few characters, to correspond to their socioeconomic class. So I was wondering what you could tell me about women's access to musical education, about how many were self-taught, how many had private tutelage.
Glenda could talk about this too. The conservatories, as we know them, were not co-ed. So women mostly studied with tutors, and this certainly takes access. Enslaved musicians were mostly men, like someone who would play for balls and whatnot. So anybody who played a paying gig, especially like a dance, as far as I know, was a man. For the most part, there are always exceptions, but the way that, and those people would also have tutors. So if you go further into less privileged classes, you're talking about smaller or no keyboards. You're talking about voice, fiddles, flutes, but a lot of fiddle and voice. Anything to add?
I'm well, about music education too.
Yeah.
There's this, probably know this, like stratified class or social station line that also sort of being tiptoed around with like whether you're trying to become an occupational musician or not, or whether that's available to you. So it just makes more.
Jim had a question, I think.
Jim, sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, in your discussion of errors, I was thinking, and also sort of like Zach's comment about sort of musical literacy in terms of people noticing errors. Obviously, professionals will notice it, but other people may or may not notice it. But when I think about music in terms of the period, and also as people who go into original instruments, they talk a lot about this, particularly the whole topic of tuning.
Yes.
And I think that to the common person, they'll hear something that's out of tune. The two different instruments are sort of clashing because of tuning is off. So is there a greater attention to understanding how to do tuning at this period, and everyone works at it? And then are there errors of tuning people make comments about?
This was one of the first subjects that I was interested in because I've done a little bit of keyboard tuning and it is dang annoying and it really depends on the weather and humidifying as well, which nobody had humidifiers, but they had like sort of rudimentary ways of humidifying. For keyboards, it's a different challenge. I do have records of people's strings like blanging off of their string instruments, presumably because of weather, and people like placing orders to get lots more strings in the wintertime. The question of tuning. So this is a thing that interested me first, and I was surprised by how actually little direct evidence I found for people, musicians or anybody, complaining about it. So the record of it being a problem is in these, records of, say, like Kapellmeisters ordering supplies, and breakages of strings. I can't imagine it wasn't a problem.
You how to fix fairly readily.
Yeah.
Your basic education learning instruments, how to picture tuning.
Yeah, Turk talks about it. The treatise on keyboard playing talks about tuning and some advice about it.
A different kind of error than the kinds that you've been listening. Yeah, Jerry, then Mark.
Okay, yeah, I'm thinking about the way you're structuring the project, and it does seem to me that the move to infant mortality is a real stretch and is qualitatively very different from problems with candles, problems with eyeglasses, I think problems with transcription, right, that are directly connected to how one might play music, whereas infant mortality is just a fact of life in the 18th century. And unless you have sources that are explicitly connecting, I couldn't play that night because I was mourning the death of my child, right? Unless you have those kinds of examples, it seems to me that that's in a whole different range of issues from everything else that you had in your boxes.
Yeah, it is.
I'm wondering how useful it is, given that, like, we can say, life before antibiotics was really hard and a lot of kids died, right? And there was a general cultural assumption that women might die in childbirth and that very few of your children, might make it out of infancy. But to connect that to music making specifically seems to me a bit difficult, because you could connect it to every aspect of life, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a much more general issue than the ones that you've been zeroing in on with eyesight, which and so many of the things that you are talking about have to do with sight. I mean, another issue you might think about is poor heating in rooms, right?
Oh yeah, that is in there. I didn't put it in a box, but yeah, chills and drafts and yeah.
Yeah, or just your fingers going numb, right? Because it's cold. So I mean, I think it's probably do better to really stick to those things that really are directly related to performance rather than existential angst, right? That life is tough.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I have two big chapters on different kinds of distractions, and one is this kind of external and one is internal. And mortalities is in there, but as is illness, smallpox, which Mozart had when he was a kid, and then he had pock marks. One record of someone looking at their hand and being like, ugh. And I guess my counter argument, which my only hesitation myself about some of these internal distraction was, well, I've been through sad times and I can play. But the other thing is, I've been through sad times and I couldn't play. So, life can be tough. And sorry, excuse me, wasn't expecting that. I think because so many musicians were women, but also were people. I think part of the point is that artists are people. And when they step forward to be vulnerable, they're not superhuman. They can't always make the shift. And while it is speculative, as I said, we have this is where the evidence from novels comes in, and especially novels written by women before Jane Austen. Georgian novels in that period talk about, well, I read this letter and then I couldn't do anything else, and a lot of these sorts of distractions. Also in this chapter is pain. A lot of these distractions.
Distraction doesn't cover it. It's distraction is not a strong enough term.
A lot of these distractions are difficult because they're invisible. The other things are visible. These are invisible, so you can go play. Like, what excuse do I have not to play? Like, you can see me, I look fine. I don't have a broken hand, I'm not coughing.
But except, I mean, those kinds of sorrows affect every aspect of life.
Exactly.
Whereas the others you are talking about, one can make a very direct connection to the performance of music.
I mean, the only thing I'd say is it sounds like you're suggesting there's a huge culture of domestic performance at this moment, and I mean, an English bourgeois zone, perhaps, but so the expectations of domestic performance sort of going into the Austen era are so high, and so continuing, not just unmarried women, it's all kinds of women in all kinds of places.
In fact, I was surprised to learn where the average number of children someone would birth was 8. That's extremely high. And that spans a whole lot of years. And someone's not going to just stop, doing what they're doing. So absolutely, it's a speculative realm in the same way that, when we write histories of enslaved experience, it's a speculative realm. But I don't think that should stop us from what we're talking about is probably like 5 pages. Stop us from suggesting that these aspects of life can be stitched together.
But and I wonder here too if like the thinking, because I think you do find more. I mean, there is a whole tradition in the theater, and of like people's personal lives. The whole idea that the show must go on is like a cliche of the theater, because I think there is more discussion overtly of like, I couldn't play that part.
From women?
What?
From women? Because this is like.
Well, I don't know. I would guess, yes, by the 18th and 19th century. Unfortunately, in my period, I'm not familiar with those periods, and there's very few women actors in the period I am more familiar with, but so there's less evidence. But I would guess, it's just speculative. I mean, I'm guessing this like that, but I think you would find more in actors' memoirs. By the 19th century, they're famous actresses, Sarah Siddons and other who have memoirs. And I would bet you would find some stuff about them feeling unable to perform or what happened when I had to play a particular role.
Right. That would like resonate.
Because you have more, and there's more verbal content to the role. So like, could I play this role at this point? I think that might be a useful place to kind of, because again, it sounds like there's less with.
I mean, there is a bigger question
Yeah,
here.
But
Professional, domestic.
They're
and
professional
lines
services.
are-
If you're in mourning at home, you can decide not to play the piano at all. I mean,
Not if your guests are coming over
that's
and
fine.
you've been in mourning
Yeah.
continuously for 10
no
years.
danger of
For 10 years.
There's been no recent death, so you have no
Without
reason to play.
Or and maybe
Well,
part
but
of
yeah,
mourning
but-
process, you know,
yes,
maybe you
I've
have
been
people
mourning
over
for
as part
10
of
years,
mourning.
that's just
Yeah.
life.
Affected the-
But just like,
I know.
okay, I think this might be a like gendered experience difference, a disciplinary difference too.
Well, I mean, I would think there is a question that maybe we could pose about sort of the expectations of performance that you're looking at in this zone. I mean, the caricatures suggest that, boy, this is ubiquitous, so much so that everybody can make fun of it. And if there is, no way out, that this is such a fundamental part, again, of let's call it a middle class existence, or a kind of, however you want to define the class term
Right.
here, around which some of that centers, and some of this project has to center, right? That's a constraint that I think you could absolutely, if everyone says you have to play and you have to play, it's almost like a show must, there's a kind of pressure
But
there,
it may
even
be-
in the
I think
domestic
it's
space.
useful
I mean,
to
is that
compare
true?
with professionals because they're gonna be giving you more of the experience. But
Yeah.
still,
sources.
I mean, in other words, how do you triangulate where the evidence is coming? Like, it may be that you could find examples from professionals, and maybe there is some reason why you get less evidence directly in the musical sphere, because the women playing in a domestic environment are not liable to write their memoirs.
Not that
I mean,
important.
but it might.
They keep diaries. Yeah.
So Marco has a question. Let's get Marco.
I have a question or comment, and thank you for your presentation. I'm coming from medieval philology and textual criticism. I cannot sing, I couldn't play any instrument.
Yeah.
I was very interested by your reference to the ideology of the mistakes, like why and what the conditions are. And I'm very interested in knowing more about the typology of mistake, and if there are references to that, and if you have a connection between specific sort of mistake environments that foster mistakes, or objects that foster mistakes, and the type of mistakes that you make. And my comment is, I think I was not taken aback by your reference to infant mortality, because the whole start was about a very gendered experience, and I think the gender experience also affected the perception and our perception, and the type of questions that we asked, because we're also gendered as listeners. And I don't necessarily agree on what Jerry said, because I'm thinking of medieval monks who see Satan everywhere, who see sin everywhere, and that inevitably enters the sort of scribal chain of words. And it's like asking them not to be obsessed by sin and not to be obsessed by hell when they are working or where they are living, because that is such a part of their experience that is not just a mechanical element that affects them. And I can only think that infant mortality might have a heavier impact on a woman who's playing than something that doesn't exist like hell might have on a monk.
Stuck that one in there.
Well, thank you for that. I've a question about typology from a philologist. It's excellent. So looking at
Just another thing, we see you don't hear the mistake that somebody made in 1777. We see the mistake, we can easily infer the reason of the mistake, and we see even the corrections sometimes. on the mistake. So it's a different approach, I understand that. So,
I've looked, one of my first tasks was to look in the treatises, so like, directives of how best to play from this period and just kind of gather from them what good playing is. And by inference, what bad playing is. Not only, but mistakes are different from bad playing, like the sorts of things that you're supposed to correct. And also what you're supposed to practice for. And I mentioned practicing because any of us who have learned a craft or learned music know that like you practice the piece, like you practice the hard things in the piece. And learning music then was not the same. You learned the skills, you learned like scales, you learned ornaments, and then you could play the music. So that's what the directives are like. And so that means what constitutes mistakes are in the realm of interpretation. So like there are problems if you're asking about a typology as defined at the time, there are then other typologies that as I would define them. But as defined at the time, it's like you got what we would call the affect wrong. Like you totally got the mood of the piece wrong. But a big one is tempo. People like choosing wrong tempo, people misreading the meter. And then if you misread the meter in this period, this is specialty language, but if you misread the meter, then you're also doing other wrong things like emphasis is wrong. Those are the big mistakes. People are, and I was most interested in that because people aren't writing everywhere like, God, we're in the notes, like don't play wrong notes. But that's not as much as of a concern because a lot of the repertoire is using the skills that you've developed in practicing. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
yes.
Yeah.
Took your test, and like I once read 2 different stanzas from 2 different sonnets as part of one sonnet because my the papers of my presentation were in the wrong order. I was wondering if they just move from page to page or from sort of section to section, skipping things.
I appreciate that.
Yes, everyone's worst nightmare. The pages out of order are falling off the music stand. Thank you, Emily. For a really generative session and thoughtful, and there
I had other slides on like bells and if you want to
so much